Hi everyone, I'm Cal Spriggs. Today I'm going to show everyone how I built a really cool land train for Necromunda and use in 40k as terrain. I've been putting together an entire horde of ground vehicles for Necromunda, but I really wanted a super heavy scale vehicle for some of the fun ash waste scenarios. I already have the hauler vehicle that Games Workshop makes, but I wanted something even bigger. I found this toy truck at a thrift store and my first thought was that the scale was way off and it wouldn't work. For those of you with kids who might recognize it from the Paw Patrol TV show. Even so, it cost just a couple of dollars, so I figured I'd buy it and see what I could do. The interesting thing off the bat to me was that the sidewalls, unlike a toy dump truck, were right at the correct level for Warhammer 40k and Necromunda models to have a good firing platform. The bed doesn't quite fit the standard containers in sideways, but it does fit one lengthwise with room to spare for models to stand. Plus I have plenty of barrels and crates that I can stack inside to make it look heavily laden. I really like the idea of this being a trundling fortress on wheels, something like the Jawa sandcrawler that has been pressed into service hauling whatever cargoes the gangers have found, and operates as their base of operations in the deep wastes. The first part of converting it is to up-armor the cab. This is where the scale is furthest off from Warhammer, and I want it to seem like a ship's bridge, complete with flying wings that passengers and crew can stand on and fire from. I used heavier cardstock for this, measuring it to fit a piece at a time. Cardstock is good for a job like this because it's fairly sturdy and holds up well. When it's painted up, it looks like thick steel plates. The whole project involved a lot of measuring and cutting and then checking the fit. As this is a centerpiece model, I want the conversions to stand out and for it to look like an in-universe vehicle, and not just a toy that I can throw some main on and put on the table. As such, I try to be as precise as possible with most of my cuts. The thing is not just a transport vehicle for a gang, it functions as their base of operations, so it will get more care and attention by far than most ash waste vehicles. As such, I wanted the lines to be clean and for the whole construct to have a sturdy, armored look to it. For those who have watched my ash waste junker video, I struggled a lot with getting superglue to stick to the plastic when putting on parts. I fixed that here by using a fine file to scuff up the surface where I would be making my additions. This makes the superglue stick better with a rougher surface. It's also a good technique for getting spray paint to stick to flat surfaces, so I recommend it if you're having issues with that as well. With the surface roughened, I started gluing on the armored plates over the cab. Later on I plan to come back with some detail bits to break up the flat surfaces, but for now I wanted to box in the bridge of this landship, and in the process hide the off-scale details inside. The front area of the cab curves a bit here. Rather than bending the cardstock, I cut armored slats that made more sense at this scale. For anyone who's ever worked with metal before, curving steel plates is hard, especially thick steel. It is far more often forged into flat plates, and if someone is working without industrial scale forges, they can then just cut those plates into slats that they can use to create a curve piece by piece. That is essentially what I did here, only using cardstock instead of steel plates. I wanted the cuts to look sharp, as I explained before, so I used a straight edge to make sure everything lined up. There's a lot of this throughout the build, making sure I had exactly the right size piece, and then checking everything before gluing the next piece into place. It can be a bit like creating a puzzle and then putting it together. I had cardstock, thin cardboard sheet, corrugated paper, and plastic mesh sheets all around my workbench, along with stirrer sticks, matchsticks, and all manner of bits. I'm sure most hobbyists have similar collections, and having all those random materials and bits allowed me to be creative as I figured out what I wanted to go where. Once I had the armored plates over the top, I wanted plastic mesh over the front. I used granny grating, the plastic mesh used for needlepoint. Measuring this was easy, the little lines of it line up great, and it gives the perception that those using it can see through it while still masking the interior of the build from view. Since I hadn't taken this thing apart and removed the interior, and I really wasn't sure that was possible with how it was put together, I wanted to hide as much of it as possible while still giving the impression that those inside could see out. When you look at the size of the interior, there's pretty much enough room for an entire squad to be in there, which fits with this being the bridge of a huge landship. The big set of grating over the whole area adds to that illusion, similar to a big glass bridge on a modern ship, or the big viewports on a spaceship bridge in a movie like Star Wars. To offset that size though, I was going to need something to put it all into scale, but I'll go into that a bit later. As you watch the excitement that is cutting and measuring, I'll take a brief moment to note that when creating centerpieces like this and also stationary bits of terrain, putting little details in to tell a story makes it more interesting. Sure, I could take a toy dump truck, paint it up, and use it as an armored carrier for a Necromunda game, but it's going to look just like that, a toy dump truck that I spent a little effort on. In this case, I wanted to establish a theme, that of a land ship, with gangers traveling across the wastes, chasing down smaller vehicles and leaping or swinging aboard and taking them over. As such, I was considering ways to make it look more like a ship to emphasize all those traits, while still not making it look too ridiculous in the process. It's a fine balance to run, but in the end I think it paid out. You can see that despite my prep work, I still struggled a bit here. The plastic mesh is flexible but sort of springy, so it doesn't like staying where I glued it against the very slight curve of the front of the cab. I struggled with it quite a bit, and you'll see a bit later that I decided to make a frame for it, both to make it sturdier and to overall just improve the looks. In keeping with the land pirate theme, I wanted some deck guns that the crew could fire, sort of like swivel guns on an old pirate ship. I have a lot of Imperial Guard weapon team bits, and I used autocannons for this, though I also made up some heavy bolters for variety. I really like the idea of this thing rolling up alongside another vehicle and the deck crew just opening up on them. Since I wanted the guns to both move and be able to be swapped out, of course I was going to use magnets. Will I probably ever use different gun options on this thing? Almost definitely not. Do I need the guns to rotate? Also, no. But it adds to the cool factor, and frankly, it's the stupid little things like that that make me happy. This was a big project overall, and it was little details like that kept me interested, especially at the thought of some almost comic book style scene of gangers rolling along singing pirate shanties as they blast their opponents to wreckage. Like I said, it's often the stupid little things that can bring the most joy. Once I had the gun pivot glued and magnetized, I moved on to the side. This thing is huge, and the land pirates needed a way to get on board. The toy already had a sort of ladder area, but I needed to add details, and this also gave me the opportunity to show the scale of this thing a bit in the process. I used coffee stirrer sticks for the sides of the ladder, which might have been a mistake with how thin they are. We'll see how they hold up in the long term. I used matchsticks, cutting them to length for the ladder rungs. The width here worked out just about perfect, so I could cut the matchsticks in half exactly to make up the rungs of the ladder. This was a relatively quick part of this to build, and I was really happy with how it turned out. It's a simple thing, but it adds a lot to the vehicle, showing where and how the land pirates get on board, and it also gave me an idea of where to go next with the build. With the side ladder on, I wanted to build the access point to the bridge. My first thought had been a door through the cargo bed, but I realized I liked the idea better of giving it a flying bridge, a platform along the side of the bridge where they can navigate and shoot from. This also lets me build a connection point on the outside going back to the ladder in the cargo area. Since this part jutted out from the ship, I wanted it sturdy, so I drilled holes into the side to make sure I had a good connection point. I used my cordless drill for this. It saves a lot of time, and while a Dremel tool might have worked, I had this on hand. I used matchsticks for the foundation of the platform, and I went with more mesh plastic for the platform itself. I wasn't super thrilled with the mesh, so I planned to add reinforcement to it. I ended up using another matchstick for cross bracing between the ones in the foundation, which allowed me to make the whole thing a lot sturdier as a result. You can see me here and there checking the size and scale of this with the model, just to make sure it all works. With the platform in place and reinforced, I extended the ladder with matchsticks for the sides and also as rungs. This allowed me to take it all the way up to the cargo deck. Also, with the truck on the side, I added some support beams under the flying bridge, both to make it more sturdy and to make it more realistic. Overall, I really liked the look of this. It looked a lot like an industrial catwalk that somebody had welded into place, and at the same time it didn't look ramshackle like an orc construct. It looked like what people might do if they wanted to accomplish the same thing. It also put the scale of this thing into perspective with the platform leading to the door access. It really makes this land ship look huge. With one side mostly done, I went on to the other side. I had to be careful working on it because it's heavy enough that I didn't want to crush the flying bridge on the first side. I added some mesh grating to the side so that the crew would have a way to see out. But again, I didn't want the entire side but I didn't want the entire side set up that way. I also wanted to make it look framed out, so you can see me here cutting stirrer sticks and segments along the perimeter of the mesh to give it a more planned and secure look. This also added some nice reinforcement to the mesh, so it didn't flex quite as much. This took a while, particularly cutting all the little pieces to fit, but I think it really added the detail and visual interest to the build that helps make it all look more realistic. Since we're here at the midpoint of the video, I figure I'd remind you to like and subscribe. Not because you don't already know, but because otherwise the world might descend into madness and chaos, the old gods might awaken, and dogs and cats might be living in harmony, or something like that. Anyway, I'd originally planned to do a second door and a flying bridge on this side as well, but as I considered it, I liked the idea of having just the one access point to the landship's bridge, with gangers fighting on a single narrow catwalk or climbing on top of the cab in an attempt to take the vessel over. So instead I just made a solid plate and then worked on reinforcing it. I tried a few different things here, eventually settling on a simple cross brace. Later on, I came back and added some electrical cables coming out of here and going up onto the roof just to make it a bit more interesting. I think probably I should have added some kind of antenna or sensor dish on this side too, though maybe I'll come back and do that later. Or maybe I'll just add magnets so I can attach different things on it. Who knows? The great thing with a build like this is there's no real limit. I can always come back and change things a bit, and with it being a Necromunda vehicle, it can look like a clutched together addition without being an issue. Again, I used stirrer sticks, bits of cardboard, and cardstock to give it a patched, reinforced, and repaired look. Once I had the plate the way I wanted, I moved on to the rest of the side. I didn't have the visual interest here of a ladder, so I made do with a few different armor plates and areas to break up the overall shape of it a little bit and add areas that I could paint different colors to make it more interesting. Along the way of making the other parts, I had a lot of scraps that I had tried in different places, at times making it a bit more ramshackle in appearance. The landship might have originally been designed for some civilian task, but has since been converted by the gangers who infest it. I also had some oil drum halves, which I used in a few different places as the thing's fuel tanks, finally settling on the false ladder well on this side as a good location. I'm not entirely satisfied, as this seems like a tiny fuel tank for this huge behemoth, but maybe this is just the one showing on the outside, and there's others interior. Or maybe the thing runs off an adamantic reactor like a dreadnought, and this exterior tank is just for coolant. Who knows? I added a gun mount onto this side, mirroring the left side pintle, or should I say port side, since it is a landship. Once I was happy with that, I moved on to the rear. There was some stuff back here that I thought I could use, possibly as another gun platform, but the scale of it really didn't fit. My thought was then to make an elevator platform. After all, they had to have some way to get all that cargo up onto the cargo deck, right? There's a lot of cutting and shaping of this. I used sturdy cardstock to build the base of the platform, using the existing frame of the truck as the attachment points. I didn't want to use just a square object either, as this thing is designed to lift up heavy crates. I wanted it to have a more finished look. I went with cutting the corners off at a 45-degree angle. This gave it a more finished look and avoided the sort of boxy, clumsy look that I felt would have detracted from the model. I cut a layer of plastic mesh to match to give it a look like metal grating, and then I measured and cut some thin cardboard to sandwich the mesh grating and cardstock and make it all more sturdy. Overall, this adds a nice bit of interest to the rear of the landship, where they can load cargo, carry prisoners, or even make them walk the plank. It's the 41st millennia after all, so I'm sure they'll find something awful to do to one another. I managed to lose the footage of me painting it, but here it is as a finished product, with some gangers on board for scale. I love the size of this thing, and I can't wait to use it in an ash waste game. Even just as stationary terrain, it's tremendously impressive, and with some of the rolling ground scenarios, I think it will be absolutely awesome. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you have to think. Feel free to comment, especially if you like the idea or you have some thoughts on how to improve it. Feel free to check out my books in the links below, or follow the links to get hobby materials. Thanks for watching, everyone.